attendant leaned into our cabin a little after midnight and said it so quietly I almost convinced myself I'd dreamt it. "Get off at the next stop, and whatever you do, don't wake him." Then she straightened up, smoothed the front of her VIA uniform, and was gone down the corridor. Before I could ask her what on earth she meant, I lay there in the dark for a long moment with my heart going sideways. We were 2 nights out of Toronto on the Canadian, somewhere in the black middle of northern Ontario where the cell signal dies, and the towns are just a name on a sign and a single light bulb over an empty platform. My husband was asleep in the bunk beside me, one arm thrown over his face, his wedding band catching the little blue glow of the cabin nightlight. 3 weeks married. We'd planned this trip for months, the whole way across the country by rail, Toronto to Vancouver, the Rockies in the snow, the honeymoon I dreamed about since I was a girl looking at the old CP posters in my dad's study. I told myself the woman was tired or confused, or maybe she'd mixed us up with another cabin. People say strange things at midnight. I'm not someone who believes in omens. I'm an accountant by trade, for heaven's sake. I believe in reconciliations that balance and in reading the fine print. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and the train was already slowing, the brakes letting out that long iron sigh as we eased toward whatever pinprick of a town came next. I don't know why I did it. I slid out from under the blanket, found my boots, pulled my coat off the hook, and picked up my bag, the small one with my passport and my phone, and the leather folder of papers I never let out of my sight. I moved like a thief in my own honeymoon cabin, careful with the latch, careful with my breath. I had it in my head that I'd step onto the platform, get some air, prove to myself this was nothing, and climb back on before the train pulled out. I'd laugh about it in Jasper. I'd tell him about the strange woman and we'd make a joke of it over breakfast in the dining car. I'd just got the cabin door open a crack when I heard his voice. He was awake, not the foggy half-there mumble of someone surfacing from sleep. Awake, clear, low, and he was talking to someone standing just outside our door. I stopped dead in the corridor, half in shadow, the way the curve of the car hid me from anyone looking straight ahead. I should have just turned around. Instead, I leaned back against the cold wall and listened, and the bottom dropped out of my entire life in the space of about 90 seconds. "She didn't hear anything," he was saying. "Trust me. She sleeps like the dead." A woman laughed soft and easy, the way you laugh with someone you've known a long time. I knew that laugh. I'd heard it at our engagement party of all places, when she'd come up and hugged me and called me a lucky and told me to take good care of him, his old friend, from his firm. The one he'd introduced as a colleague. The one who'd sent us a ridiculously expensive bottle of wine as a wedding gift. The one I'd actually felt a little sorry for because he'd told me, in a low, confiding voice one night, that she'd had a hard time of it after a bad breakup years ago and he tried to look out for her. "Relax," she said. "You're so jumpy. By Vancouver it'll all be signed. She thinks the meeting Thursday is with the bank," he said. "About the mortgage on the house. She has no idea what she's actually putting her name to." I pressed my back into the wall so hard I felt the rivets through my coat. "And the trust?" she asked. "That's the whole game," he said. "Her father locked the inheritance up tight before he died. I can't touch it, you can't touch it, nobody can unless she signs the transfer herself. So she signs the transfer herself. Thursday. The investment paperwork. Once it's moved into the holding company, it's not her father's money anymore. It's ours." "And after?" There was a pause. I heard him shift his weight. When he spoke again, his voice had gone flat and ordinary, the way you'd discuss switching insurance providers. "After Thursday, we don't need her. That sentence is going to live in me until the day I die. Not I don't love her. Not I want out. Not even I want the money. Just, we don't need her. Like I was a tool. Like I was a step in a process. Like I was a line item that could be written off. I'd known this man for 2 years. 6 months of dating before he proposed in the snow outside my apartment, with everyone we knew hiding around the corner, and in those 2 years I had told him everything. about my father dying when I was 26 and leaving me more than I knew what to do with, about how guilty the money made me feel, about how I just wanted somebody to share an ordinary life with. Sunday mornings, a dog someday, a kid maybe, a kitchen we'd argue about painting. I'd handed him every soft part of me, and he'd taken notes. The train was nearly stopped now. Out the corridor window, I could see the platform sliding past. One light, one bench, a hand-painted sign with a town name I didn't recognize. A crew member in a parka standing in the cold with a thermos. Somewhere up ahead, a fresh conductor was climbing on for the next leg. She slipped into our cabin then. I heard the rustle of her coat. I heard him say her name low and warm, the way he used to say mine, and I heard her say his back, and that was almost worse than the money. That casual intimacy. The two of them in the little room where I'd been asleep 10 minutes ago, where my wedding ring was still sitting in the dish by the bunk because it pinched at night. My whole body was screaming at me to throw the door open and tear her hair out by the roots. I'm not a violent person. I have never in my life raised a hand to anyone, but I have never wanted anything the way I wanted in that corridor. To walk in there and make them feel 1/10 of what I was feeling. I didn't move. I want you to understand that this is the part I'm proudest of, and it's the part that took everything I had. Because the rage was right there, hot and easy, and underneath it, colder and quieter, and far more useful, was the part of me that runs the numbers, the part that reads the fine print, and that part of me said, very calmly, "They think you're asleep. They think you didn't hear. That is the only advantage you will ever have over them, and if you open that door right now, you throw it away forever." So I stood in the dark, and I listened to them murmur about Thursday, about a lawyer he'd lined up, about how she'd handle the holding company filings, about a condo in a city I won't name that they were going to buy with my father's money once the dust settled. I listened until my legs went numb, and then, when the train started to move again and the platform fell away behind us into the dark, I did the only thing I could think to do. I took out my phone, turned the screen brightness all the way down so it wouldn't glow, and I started a voice recording. I held it against the gap in the cabin door, and I let them talk. They gave me 11 minutes. 11 minutes of the two of them, planning to gut my life. Names, dates, the name of the holding company, the Thursday meeting, the line, again, clear as a bell. After Thursday, we don't need her. When she finally left and went back to her own cabin, and I heard him settle into the bunk and his breathing go slow, I crept past the door, down to the very end of the train, to the parked car at the back with the little dome lounge that sits empty at 1 in the morning. And I sat down in the dark with the country rushing away behind me, and I did not cry. I made a list instead. Old habit. When my father died, I got through the funeral by making lists. So I made one now, in the notes on my phone, in the blue dark of the dome car, and the first line was the only one that mattered. He thinks I'm naive. Let him keep thinking it until Thursday. Here's what he didn't know, and what saved me. He'd seen the joint account, the checking account we'd opened before the wedding, the one with the honeymoon money in it, and the float from our guests, a few $1,000s. He thought that was the door to everything, but the inheritance was never in that account. My father, who built his whole life out of being careful, had set it up in a trust years before he got sick, with a lawyer on Bay Street I'd known since I was a child, and the trust couldn't be unwound on a whim in a moving train. Any transfer out of it needed my signature, yes. But it also needed a 14-day cooling-off period that my father's lawyer had insisted on, a clause my husband couldn't have known about, because I'd never thought it mattered enough to mention. The kind of detail that's boring right up until it saves your life. He didn't know about the two-factor authentication on every account, the codes that came to my phone and only my phone. He didn't know that an inheritance, kept separate, isn't even split the way the rest of the marriage is. If things go bad, my lawyer had drill bit into me before the wedding, and I'd half resented him for it at the time. Keep it separate. Keep it in the trust. Don't commingle. Promise me. I'd promised to make him stop fussing. Now I understood I'd been promising my father, really, from the grave, to be careful. So I didn't get off at the next stop. I went back to my cabin before dawn, slid in beside the man who was planning to erase me, and when he stirred and reached for me out of habit, I let him, and I said something soft and sleepy, and I felt him relax. And the whole rest of that day, as we wound up through the muskeg and out onto the prairie, as the porter brought us coffee and the scenery turned gold then white, I was the happiest, easiest, most loving new wife you ever saw. I laughed at his jokes. I held his hand at the window when the first ranges of the Rockies came up out of the plains like a wall of broken teeth. I told him I couldn't wait to get settled in Vancouver and start our real life. I have never lied so well in my life. I didn't know I had it in me. There's something that happens to you when somebody you love decides you're disposable, a kind of clarity, like cold water. The crying came later. On the train, there was no room for it. That second woman, his friend, kept her distance, but I caught her watching me a few times in the dining car, and I made sure to be warm to her too. I asked about her work. I told her how glad I was she'd be in Vancouver, that I hoped we'd see lots of her. I watched the flicker of unease cross her face, and I filed it away. She's the nervous one, I wrote in my list. He's the actor. She's the one who'll crack. The attendant. The one who'd warned me. I didn't see again for 2 days. I'd half talked myself into believing I'd imagined her. Then the last morning, somewhere past Kamloops with the Fraser running brown and fast beside the tracks, she came through with the coffee and she set my cup down and without looking at me, she said in a low voice, "You stayed on." I stayed on, I said. "Good," she said. "Stay smart then." And she moved down the aisle and that was all. I didn't understand it yet. I just held on to it like a coin in my pocket. We rolled into Vancouver at the end of the line, into the old station with its high ceilings and its smell of wet wool and coffee. And he was already different the second we stepped onto the platform. Solicitous, sweet, talking about how money complicates things, how he just wanted us to be a team, how he'd been thinking, and he had a plan to make my father's gift really work for us, grow it, secure our future. Isn't that what Dad would have wanted? He used the word dad about my father. I wanted to be sick on his shoes. I smiled and said it sounded wonderful and I couldn't wait to hear all about it Thursday. That night, in the hotel, he poured 2 glasses of wine and made a toast to us, to the future, to fresh starts. I touched my glass to his and didn't drink. He didn't notice. People who think you're stupid stop watching you closely. That's the whole secret. That's the entire trick. He'd stopped watching me weeks ago, maybe months ago, maybe from the very first dinner, and so he had no idea, lying there congratulating himself, that I'd spent the train ride and a long Tuesday on the hotel Wi-Fi doing the only thing I'm truly good at. I'd called my father's lawyer. I'd forwarded him the recording. I'd called a forensic accountant his firm recommended, a sharp woman who'd spent 20 years pulling apart exactly this kind of thing. I pulled the statements on the joint account and found, sitting there in black and white, 2 attempted transfers already initiated, small ones, test runs, a few $100s each, moving toward an account I didn't recognize. He hadn't even waited for Thursday. He'd started skimming the moment we left Toronto. The honeymoon money, our wedding gifts. He'd been stealing from me on our honeymoon while I slept beside him and dreamed about a dog in a kitchen. And the holding company he'd mentioned in the dark, my accountant found it in an afternoon. A numbered company, registered in British Columbia 6 weeks before our wedding. His name wasn't on it. Hers was. Thursday came. He met me in the lobby in his good coat, all smiles, and said the lawyer's office was a short cab ride away, that everything was simple, that I just needed to sign a few things and we'd be set. I said that sounded perfect, and that I'd actually arranged for us to meet at my own lawyer's office instead, since he happened to be in town that week and I wanted Dad's old lawyer to bless it for old time's sake. I watched something tighten behind his eyes. But what could he say? Refusing would have looked strange. So he came. I'll remember his face when we walked into that boardroom on the 17th floor with the whole gray city and the harbor spread out behind the glass. Because it was not the bank's nice young associate waiting for us. It was my lawyer who'd known me since I was 9. It was the forensic accountant, with 3 banker's boxes and a laptop open. And it was a single sheet of paper sitting in the middle of the long table, face up, that I knew without looking was the transcript of 11 minutes in the dark on a train in northern Ontario. He stopped in the doorway. I watched him do the math. I watched him understand that this was not a signing. This was an ambush, and he'd walked into it wearing his good coat. "What is this?" he said. Not even a question. He knew. My accountant slid the first box toward him and started laying it out, flat and unhurried, the way you'd explain a tax filing. The numbered company. The 2 test transfers, already flagged. The emails, he thought he deleted them. He hadn't understood that deleted isn't gone, that a workplace email account belongs to the employer and lives on a server for years. Messages between him and her going back 4 months before our wedding. The cooling off clause on the trust that would have caught the Thursday transfer even if I'd been the fool he took me for. And then the recording. She didn't play it. She didn't have to. She just set the transcript closer to him and let him read his own words. After Thursday, we don't need her. He went white, then a sort of gray. He tried, of course. This is a misunderstanding. Those transfers were, I was repositioning funds, that's all. For the honeymoon, I was going to tell you. My lawyer didn't even raise his voice. Attempting to move funds toward an account held by a third party without your wife's knowledge is not repositioning, he said. There's a word for it, and it isn't a kind one. And here's the thing I'd been holding back. The thing the attendant's words had been circling all along. My lawyer reached into his own folder and took out a slim file and set it in front of me, not in front of my husband, and said quietly, "Your father asked me to keep this. He never showed it to you. He hoped he wouldn't have to." My father, it turned out, had never trusted him. Not from the first dinner. He'd said nothing to me because what father wins that argument with a grown daughter in love? But he quietly hired someone, through the lawyer, through the firm, the kind of discreet investigator who does background work for estates, to keep half an eye out. After my father died, the lawyer had kept it up out of loyalty, low-key, a name run here, a record checked there. And when I got engaged, and the investigator pulled the thread kept going. There had been a woman before me. Not her. Another one, 2 years earlier in another city, who'd had family money and a sudden engagement and a fiancé who'd nearly cleaned her out before her brother got suspicious and pulled her back from the edge. It hadn't gone to court. These things rarely do. She'd been too ashamed, the way I might have been if I hadn't heard 11 minutes of the truth in the dark. He'd done this before. I wasn't the first. I was just the biggest payday, because my father had been more careful than her family, and that carefulness was the only reason I was sitting at that table instead of in a lawyer's office, signing my inheritance into a numbered company on the 17th floor. The attendant on the train had been hers, the investigators, sent to watch, to be sure, to be near in case it tipped over, and to give me the one push that mattered. Don't wake him. She hadn't meant get off the train and run. She'd meant, don't let him know you know. And by the grace of God and 2 years of doing other people's books, I'd understood it the right way. I looked across the table at the man I'd married, and I felt the strangest thing. Not love, obviously. Not even rage anymore. Mostly just a kind of clear, cold pity, the way you'd feel looking at a trap that had snapped on empty air. He signed the separation papers that afternoon. My lawyer made it very simple. Sign now and we keep it civil and quiet. Fight it, and the recording and the transcript and the boxes go to the regulator and the police. And given that he worked in wealth management, given that his entire career rested on a license that depends on being a person clients can trust with their money, there would be nothing left of him by spring. He understood. He signed, the pen scratching across the paper, was the loudest thing in the room. At the elevator, when the others had stepped away, he leaned in close and said, low, like it was supposed to wound me, "You think you've won?" I looked at him. I made myself look, really look, at the face I'd promised to wake up next to for the rest of my life. "I'm not playing," I said. That was the difference between us the whole time. That should have been the end. Honestly, if he'd left it there, I might have let it go, kept my money, kept my name, walked away, healed up, learned to trust again someday. The civil, quiet ending. But I'd spent 2 days with that file my father left me, and I couldn't make peace with the woman before me, the one who'd been too ashamed to speak, the one whose engagement photos the investigator had found. Because I kept thinking if her family had said something, if anyone had said something, I'd never have been on that train at all. So a week after I got home, a small padded envelope arrived at his office. No note, just a flash drive. Not the recording. He'd already lived through that. Something quieter and worse. Copies of the numbered company filings with her name on them, the email chain, the bank flags, and a single page of dates laying out the pattern. Her, then me. The same play run twice. I sent the same package, the same week, to the provincial securities regulator and to the compliance office at his firm, with my name nowhere on any of it. I didn't need to be the one holding the knife. The facts did the work. He told her that night on the train that she'd never check. He meant me, but he'd never bothered to check her either. Never realized that the moment his firm's compliance team opened that file, her name was the one stapled to the company. Her name was the one on the registry. And there is no version of that story where only one of them goes down. His license was suspended pending a review inside the month. By the time the leaves came back, the review had become an investigation, and the investigation had become the kind of thing that follows a person into every job interview for the rest of their life. Her little consulting business folded. Turns out clients don't love a numbered company in the news. I heard, secondhand, that the two of them aren't together anymore. Imagine that. Imagine building your whole future on a partner you'd already agreed was disposable, and being surprised when it turns out you're disposable too. I kept the house. I kept the trust untouched exactly the way my father built it, and I think he'd be glad more than anything that the fence he put around it in his last good year held the night it was tested. I kept my own name. I'd never properly changed it, kept meaning to, and now I never will. The money still makes me a little uneasy, the way it always did. But I understand now what it really was. Not a windfall. A wall my father built around his daughter while he still could, hoping she'd never need it. Building it anyway. The investigator. I met her finally in person, a few months later in a coffee shop near my office. The most ordinary place in the world. Both of us with paper cups. She wasn't in a VA uniform. She was just a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes who'd worn it because it let her move through the train and watch a man who didn't watch her back. I tried to thank her, and got about 3 words in before I had to stop and look out the window for a minute. She let me. When I'd got hold of myself, she said the only soft thing she ever said to me. "You did the hard part yourself, you know," she told me. "I told you not to wake him." Plenty of people would have thrown that door open and felt better for 10 seconds and lost everything. You held still. That's not luck. That's who you are. Then she finished her coffee, told me to take care of myself, and left me at the table. People keep asking me if I'm broken about it. About him, about the marriage, about doing the whole thing over again. The dating, the trusting, the soft handing over of yourself to another person. And the truth is I'm not, or not the way they expect. I don't think love is blind. I think love just keeps its eyes closed for a while, because it's tired and it wants to rest. And the trick is to open them before someone walks off with everything while you sleep. I learned to open them on a train in the dark, in the middle of a country I was crossing, to start a life that didn't exist. And the best revenge, it turns out, isn't the regulator or the suspended license or his name in the trade papers, satisfying as all of that was. The best revenge was the morning a year later when I woke up alone in my own house, in the quiet, with my father's walls still standing around everything that was mine, and realized I hadn't thought about either of them in 3 whole days. He never even noticed me leave. That's the part that still makes me smile. He spent 2 years certain he was the one playing me, and he never once felt the floor go out from under him until it already had. He fell asleep on that train so sure of how the story ended. I just let him keep dreaming it all the way to Vancouver, right up until the morning the dream came due. The night I understood what Declan really was, I had about 90 seconds to decide who I was going to be, and I've thought about those 90 seconds almost every day since. The rage was right there, easy and hot, and it would have felt wonderful for about 10 seconds. I could have thrown that cabin door open and screamed and let the whole train watch me come apart. Instead, I stood in the dark and held still, and holding still is the hardest thing I have ever done. Nothing about what came after worked because I was clever. It worked because I didn't move when every cell in my body was begging me to. That's the part people miss when they hear the story. They think the win was the recording, or the lawyer, or my father's trust standing exactly where he built it. Those things mattered, but they were just tools sitting on a shelf. The real reason Declan and Larissa walked into that boardroom instead of out of my life with everything I owned is that, in the corridor, I stopped being the woman who reacts and became the woman who watches. You can't think clearly and panic at the same time. I chose to think. And here's the thing I keep coming back to. When it was over, I had every reason and every means to become exactly like them. I could have quietly drained the joint account back twice over, could have buried him without ever telling the next woman she was at risk too. I didn't. I sent the file to the regulator, and I sent the truth out into the world. Because the whole point of refusing to be his victim was refusing to become a smaller version of him. Larissa learned that the man who calls you a partner one night calls you disposable the next. Declan learned that a person he'd written off as naive had been raised by someone careful. Cause and effect. You treat people like furniture long enough, and one day the furniture has your whole plan on a flash drive. If I could hand one thing to anyone sitting where I was, it wouldn't be money or a lawyer's number. It would be 3 quieter things. Keep your sense of right intact even when betrayal makes cruelty feel justified, because that line is the only part of you nobody can steal. Keep your head clear enough to see the difference between feeling powerful and being smart, and when the floor goes out from under you, find the strength to stay standing 1 more hour, because almost everything that saved me happened in the hours I refused to fall apart. Colette told me, over coffee months later, that plenty of people would have woken him and lost everything for 10 seconds of relief. I think about my father building that wall around me before he was even gone, and I understand now that the wall was never really the money. It was the lesson. Be decent, be sharp, and don't break, and you'll walk off the train with everything they came to take.